Hello, in this lecture you'll learn how to prepare the Rethink database for use. So first of all, you will need three things to actually use the Rethink database on C# and on any other languages. You would need three things as well. So first we have our RethinkDB, the actual database. So we can see that we have official packages. So we have for Ubuntu, OS X, and all of the other systems. But will be doing everything for Windows this time in this course. So we will need to download the Rethink database for Windows. And you can see that we have a link here, and the link will be provided. So you don't have to write that down. It will be provided. So the thing you do, you just click on the install and the download will begin, and you'll simply go through the steps of the installer and it will be a very quick and simple installation. So the second part is a lot more complex. You need to install the Redis or Redis, whichever way you want to pronounce it. Now, I'm not going to go into details on this component. It just has to be there. It supports the Rethink database. It's a dependency for it. So if you want to get into details on that, you can read the descriptions, you can read the documentation on the redis.io. And we are now in the download page. However, the Redis is meant for the Linux systems, and the downloads are for Linux as well. So what we need to do, we need to go into GitHub and we need to find this URL, which will of course be provided for you. You don't have to search for that on the internet. And here you simply download packages. And again, we are not going to actually download and install, but this is a very simple procedure. You just download the exe file and you'll start installing, and you'll need to set it to run as a service on Windows, but you'll see those steps on the actual installer, so it's very simple to do. Now, without that, it will not run. The Rethink database will not run, so it's a mandatory component to this whole thing. And so once we have these two, we need to install the actual client driver, as it is called here. So you have these official drivers. You have one for JavaScript, one for Ruby, and one for Python, and then of course for Java. But we need this C#, and as you can see, it's current community supported drivers. So these are a bit risky. Some are worse, some are great, but we are going to go for the Javas, whichever way you pronounce the name. The other one is perhaps less supported. It has a lesser following, so we are going to go with Javas, whichever way you want to call it. So we can go to see that on GitHub. However, we will not be downloading it from here, but if we go to Wiki quickly, we will see that it is based on Java. So this C# driver has some extra language features and adds some expressiveness over the Java driver. So if we go back to the Rethink database documentation, we will actually be able to go to the API page. And if we go to Java, the command reference page or the API tab here, if we go to Java, you will be able to use this page for reference on the C#. Again, some things can look a bit different, but it's pretty much the same. The syntax is very similar. So if you need that reference, you go to the Java, not to Ruby, Python, or JavaScript, but to Java. And now if we go to the Visual Studio, we will set up a simple console project. So what we do here, we do File, New, Project, and then we'll go to the .NET Core, we are already in the .NET Core tab here. So we do console project, but if you want, it will work on class library, it will work on web application. So whether you're using MVC or API application or some other one, it will work on all .NET Core applications. It will also work on .NET Framework applications. So basically, whenever you're using C#, you can use this driver. So what we do now, we simply create this application. We don't worry about the name. We just wait for it to load. And we will go back to this GitHub page. And as you can see, it's RethinkDB.driver. We will try to find something similar in the NuGet packages, in the NuGet package manager in the Visual Studio. So it still is loading here, and once the project is created, we will see how to find that. It's actually very simple to get it. You don't need to download it from GitHub. That's a bad idea. It will waste time and you can make some mistakes, miss something. So you just right click on the project and you go manage NuGet packages. Just like that. And you go to the browse tab. And now we will try to find the RethinkDB driver. As you can see, it has already been searched before on this Visual Studio. So we search RethinkDB.driver. And we go for the first one, ignore the other ones. You could find some use for that, but you go to RethinkDB.driver. Nothing else with that. And as you can see, it's the same thing that we have on the GitHub. And the latest stable version is 2.3.23. So you simply click install on that and you'll have your database driver ready. You click OK, of course, and you click accept, and that's it. It will install the driver and you will be able to use that. And in the next lecture you'll actually see how to set up connection, and then later you will see how to insert files and then how to use it in other ways. And that concludes our lecture for the day. Hello. In this lecture you will learn how to connect to the database that you have, or rather to the server, the RethinkDB server. So as you can see in the code, we already have our method in which we will put the connection, and we also have our output, so you'll see soon what it actually will output. So first of all, we have to declare the variable for the driver. So we write variable here, var, and we will call that R, capital letter. You can actually call it whatever you want, but that's the usual naming system that we use. So we write equals, then we write RethinkDB. Now if you go to the top, you can see that we have our TSC output. So we will first build the connection, and then we will check if the connection is open or closed, or whatever the state of the connection is. So first of all, let's do RethinkDB, and then we do driver, and then after driver we need to again write RethinkDB like that. So it says the RethinkDB API here, so we access that API, and then we go to R. As you can see, there are no other options, so there's no place to make a mistake here. And so you click that, and then we go to the actual connection. Now the connection, we again declare a variable here, and we will name the connection con with 2 n's. And then we access the R variable, we write R, and we write now connection. We need the connection, and that's where the interesting part starts. So first of all, we of course need a couple of important things here, mandatory things. So the first one will be, of course, the host name. And since we are running this whole thing on our computers, on localhost, we will write localhost. But it could be the host name or the IP address of your server, whatever kind of arrangement you're using. So we write localhost, just like that. And then we will write port. So the port for accessing is by default, it is 28015. So 28,015. That's the default port for accessing these commands, sending commands and receiving data. And now we also will add a timeout in case the server is not responding. By default it is 20 seconds, but we do 60 just in case. You could leave it at 20, or you could do 200, 2000, whatever number you want, but it's probably better to leave it as low as possible. And now we do simply connect. So we do connect, and now you may have noticed that we don't actually have any kind of security in here. We don't have any users, we don't have any SSL certificates here. So in this lecture and in the other lectures, we will not be using any of that for simplicity purposes. But if you want to have a user, which you will usually have if you are using a remote server, you do simply before we connect and after the connection, anywhere here you could do simply write a dot and you write user, just like that. And as you can see, it shows user, and the first one string user, so that will be like a nickname, and then the second one is of course the password. So that's very simple here. Now the other thing you can see here, you also have the auth key. So that's the authorization key to the server if you're using that kind of an arrangement. But if you're using that, or if someone else is using that, you should ask them to give you that key and to fix everything for you. But again, we will not be using any of these features in this course. It doesn't make a difference here. And the other one is the enable SSL. So this would enable, as you can see here, it says everything enables SSL over the driver port. So that's a good security feature, and if you go down here, you don't see anything else. But on the top you also have the DB. So if you do this one, you can actually declare the default database. So you'll see this in the later lectures. We will actually be declaring a database in our queries. So we will first write DB, some database name, and then we will write table, some tables name. But you could actually skip the database part if you enter the default one. Now, if you do not enter, the default for RethinkDB will be test database, the name test. So that will be the default. But we will delete that dot here, and we will move on to the next step. So now we just try to check the connection, and to do that we do a simple return like that, and then we access the connection variable here, and then we do not the check open won't work for that, but we need to find open, as you can see here, and it's written actually gets the connection state of the socket. So as you can see, it's a Boolean value, so we will only get true or false. We don't need, it's not a method. And as you can see, it can't convert Boolean to string like that, so we do a conversion here, and we will get some kind of a result. Now we can launch that, and we will wait for it to launch, for it to connect, and we should be seeing our state in a moment here. And as you can see, we get true Boolean value, true, displayed on our console, which means that the connection is open. And that concludes our lecture for the day. In this course, we will learn how to insert values into the database table. So we will create a simple object, a class in C#, and that will be our record. So first of all, we will create a simple method here. We will do public here, and then static, and then string. And we will call that simply insert. We will only have one method here. So we do that, and now we will need to, if you remember from the connection lecture, we will need to create our driver object. So first of all, let's do variable, let's call that R again, equals RethinkDB dot driver dot RethinkDB again, and then R. So let's close that, and now we can move on to the connection. Let's do variable, connection, let's do con again. We will try to keep the same syntax in all of the other lectures as well. So first of all, let's do R, connection, just like the last time. And now we can do this whole thing in one line here. So we do host name, and that will of course be localhost. And if you're accessing some other server, it will be that server's IP of the host name. So now we do port, and port as usual, the default one will be 28015, just like that. And it's actually an integer, not a string, so let's remove those, and we have our integer here. And then let's do the timeout. Timeout will again be 60 in seconds, and let's finish that by doing connect. So we are connected now. Now we can move on to our object and then inserting that object. So first of all, we will create a simple class. Now you could create a file, another file for the class, but for the purpose of this tutorial, to make it simple, we will just do our object right here. So we do simple class, and we will call that custom object like that, and we open that up, and now we will insert some values here. So we do public string, and we will call the first one test value 1. So that will be the key to the record that we have, the row that we have. So let's do get and set as usual. We can actually copy that to make it quicker and paste it again here, and let's do test2. Now always when you have these strings, even when you have some other types, it's usually quicker to just copy them and change names or change the type. So now we will build that up in the program. In the insert method we will do that. So we do another variable, we will call that obj, like that, stands for object of course. And let's do new custom object, we build that. We don't need to do anything else here, and now we will simply assign the value. So we do that object, and we do first of all test value 1 equals, we can do, let's say, call that test val 1, and now we can copy that again, and let's rename that test value 1 to test value 2, and test val we will do test val 2 instead. And now the interesting part begins. So first of all, the result can be a lot of things. So if you do insert, it will be one thing. If you do update, it will be another thing. If you get the part of a table, it will be something. And so we need to use the dynamic object here. So we do dynamic, and we will call that result. Now this time it will be a JSON string, a raw JSON string here. So we will need to kind of convert that raw string into an object where we can access the keys and the indexes. So you will see how it works soon. So first of all, we do the inserting, and we do equals R, and now we need to do DB. It's very important to note which database it is. So first we do DB, and we have our test database, and we already have a table set up. So we do table, and we will call that test table like that, and we do insert like that, and here in the insert we will simply put our object in, and that's really all you need to do. So you put your object in, and then you do this very important thing here. You go to JSON. You can use to JSON string as you saw briefly. It doesn't matter, both should work, at least they say it should. But now we just do run, and we do con. Now it is important to note that whilst run will work on any of these, it is better to actually use specific ones for specific actions. So let's see what they are. Write the dot here, and we write run, and as you can see there are all these run changes, run atom. We won't actually get into that too much, but we can go down here and we can see all of them. So for specific things you could use them, but we will not be getting into that. As you can see, it can help with performance, as it says right here, slight edge in performance, but we shouldn't worry about that. It will just cause several problems, so we just leave that at a simple run. And you can also notice that you have run async, so you can actually do this asynchronously, which is great, but we will stick with a simple one for now. So we do run, and of course the connection here. And now we have the insertion, but as you can see we are returning a string. So what we need to do, we need to create an object from the JSON string that we will get as a result. Now you will find a lot of third-party libraries that will offer that solution. However, .NET Core actually has a native solution for that, and if we go to the NuGet packages, go to manage NuGet packages, you simply right click on your project, manage NuGet packages here, and here you will find this great thing. It's called system. As you can see, it's already been done, so it's system.json, and you go to that system.json. As you can see, it's provided by Microsoft, so it is trustworthy, and as you can see it's already installed. It can be updated, but this time we are selecting the latest table, not the preview. Usually you don't want the preview, so we go with the latest table, and we already have that, so we will see how that works. And now we will write JSON value. Now if we go above here, we can actually see that we have using system.json already inserted in this project here, in this file. But if you don't have, you should insert that first, because it won't suggest the JSON value right away. So we call that simply JSON equals, and then we do JSON value, and then we do parse this one, and as you can see it will ask you for a string, and our string is of course the dynamic result. So let's write result, and let's close that, and we do a return, return like that, and we do JSON. Now, this is the thing that you kind of have to remember, or better yet, just make notes somewhere, because you will need to kind of break for that, or you will need to go to the data explorer that you have access to in the browser, and you'll need to find the specific key. Now, what you're looking for is the generated keys. So I have that noted. So I'll simply copy that. I just copied that, and I will now insert that here. So it's called generated keys, and that is the key. And what it will give you an array of inserted values. Now, do note that we are actually inserting only one value this time, so we will only have one key. Therefore, we will only need to return a simple string here. So it still is a list, an array, whatever you want to call that, and we do need an index. So the index obviously will be 0. And now we can close that, we can save it here, and we will simply now write console write line. Now, you notice that we do have console.readKey. Now, what this does, it will wait for the key, and therefore the console won't shut down, because it will otherwise automatically shut down. So the line that we will write will be this insert method, the return for it, and it will be essentially the ID for the record. So let's do that, let's save that, and let's launch that. It should be a quick launch here. So we have our program running. Let's wait for the result. And as you can see, we got our ID for the record. And that concludes our lecture for the day. In the next one, we will try to do some other things, and then later we will try to actually receive those values, retrieve them. Hello! In this lecture, you'll learn how to retrieve all records from a table. So, as you can see here, we already have our connection established. Since this isn't the interesting part of this, it has been done prior to that. And with that, we also have a table done with some values in it. That table you will see more often in the upcoming lectures. And now you can also see that the method is actually returning a dynamic type here. So it's a dynamic object, and what we will do now is try to retrieve the values. We will do a breakpoint on that value, and we will see what we actually get this time. Now, if you remember, on the insert lecture, we saw a raw JSON string, but in this case it will be a more complex object, and we will need to deal with that in a more complex way. So first of all, we write dynamic, and we will call that RET or ret, which stands for return, because we will be returning that. And we write equals r, and now db. db, the database, is test as usual. And now we have table, and the table will simply be called test filter. So as the name suggests, we will be using that in the filtering lectures. But now we just write run, and of course connection. So we close that, and we will simply return the ret. Now, the reason we're doing that is so that we could put a breakpoint right here, and so that we could take a look at what we will get from the ret, because we won't actually be displaying all that in the console. Now, this is where the interesting part begins. So you get those values, and now you need to get them into a string format, into some kind of a readable, displayable format. So what you do here, you simply write dynamic, we call that dn here, and equals get table. So we get that table now, and we will need a for loop, or any kind of loop. So when you write for, you can double click the tab key on your keyboard. It's on your left side usually, and once you click that, you get all the stuff you need for the for loop. Now here we will need some kind of a size for the values that we get. So this will be a number of records that we get. Now this is a bit complicated, so first of all we will be getting a string there, so we need to convert that to an integer. So we do convert to int 32. Always do the 32 one, unless you absolutely need something else. But let's do the 32, and now we will do dn, and we can close that so we can see that clearly. And in the dynamic, we simply write a dot, and then we need the name for that key. So in some variables, in arrays, you would do something like this. You have those brackets, and then in the quotation marks you write the name. However, in dynamic it's different. So you write a dot, and then you write that name. So this time the name is buffered size. This can be quite complicated to remember, but I will show you how to find that name if you miss it, because even in the web browser, even in the Object Explorer that you have in the web browser, you won't be able to find this value there. So we need to know that, and once we have that, we will go into the loop, and here we will write console and write line as usual, and now we will try to display those values. So first of all, we will need to convert that to string, so we do convert to string. The reason is that it won't actually read the dynamic properly, so you need to do the string so that the write line knows what type of object you're using. So now here we do dn, and this one will be buffered items. And since we probably have more than one item, we need some kind of an index. Now an index in the dynamic is the same in an array. We just write our brackets here, and this time we will write I, the letter I, or you could write a number if you know a specific index for the specific record, but we are displaying all of them, so we are looping through that array, and we need the I to display everything we have there. So now it's all done, so we can save that, and we will launch that, and we will see what we get in the RET dynamic. So let's launch that now. We will stop at that breakpoint, and we will take a look here. It can be quite complicated, and again you need to know those values, buffered size and buffered items. It will break soon now, and as you can see, we are on the break here, and if you hover on this and extend that, you can see that buffered items count 8, so that will be the number 8. You have those buffered items, and if you hover on that, you get all these items. As you can see, we have the ID, and then we have a value 1, which is V, and then we have value 2, B, and value 3, T. Now, we have 8 values here, and if we go back, we see that the buffer size is also 8. So now we can continue. Click on that, and as you can see, all of the values were written into the console window. All of them are here, all 8 of them. And that concludes our lecture for the day. Hello. In this lecture, you'll learn how to retrieve a record by its ID. So, first of all, as you can see, we already have our insert function here, insert method, which returns a string. And as you can see, we have our custom object. So we have test value 1 and test value 2, just like we did in the insert lecture. And we insert our object and we get our key like that. And this time our object, our class, is in the different file, customObject.cs. If we go to that, we can see that we have test value 1 and test value 2. So we can close that. Since this isn't the important part of this lecture, we already have that done. So what is important is actually getting that record by its ID. So we will simply create a new record, retrieve the ID for that created record, and then we will pass that on to the get method. So now we simply write public static string, and we will call that get. Now this one, as I mentioned before, will require a string ID, so we call that string ID. And here we need to again open that connection. And what we haven't done before is actually close the connection. It's not really necessary, but it would be a good thing to close that at some point, especially if you're doing something more in the same method. So the way you do that, you simply write con and you write close. So you do the close here, and it will simply close the connection. So we can leave that like that. And so in the get method, we need the connection open, so we can copy this and paste that here. Now, a good practice would be to actually open one single connection and do both methods with that one connection, but for simplicity purposes we are not doing that. You will see how that's done in the example section of this course. So we have our connection opened, and now we will need our dynamic result. So we do dynamic, we write result equals, as usual, RDB, and the name is test. And then we need our table. So the table is test table, as you can see right here. We can copy that like that. And the only difference from the last time from the table retrieval is the get ID. So we write the dot and we write get ID. So as you can see, it is written here. It says get a document by primary key, which usually is the ID. Now what we need to do here is to write to JSON, and if you remember from before, this will give us a raw JSON string. So now we write run and we insert the connection like that. So now in the previous lectures we did that JSON string to JSON object. However, this time we will simply display the whole thing because we do actually want to see the whole record, so there's no point in doing those keys and values. So we simply write return like that, and we do result. And we can save that, and now we just need to take care of the console. And in the console we write console write line, and here we'll get and in the get we need the string, and the string comes from return from the insert, and so we write insert. As you can see, it's a method in the method, and we close that up and we should see our result. So now we can try and launch our program here, and it has launched. We will soon see the result. And as you can see, there's the ID, and then the test value 1 is test val, and test value 2 is test val 1. Now in the Visual Studio we did insert in fact test val, and the second value is test val 1. And that concludes our lecture for the day. Hello! In this lecture we will look at another filter. We will be retrieving values that contain a value that is equal to the one that you have provided. So, as you can see, we already have part of our method here. So we have our connection opened, and we do also have our reader prepared. Since this takes a long time to do, we will not be doing that. It's not important in this lecture. So now what we will do, we will simply do a return right away. We do return, and we of course write R, and then we go to DB and we do test database, and the table this time will be test filter. We do test filter. It already has many values, as we saw in the previous lectures. So now once we have the table, the interesting part begins. Now we write filter, and we close that like that, open that like that, and after that we will just do run. But in this filter method is where the interesting part begins. So what we will use here is R hash map. Now first of all we write that, we do R hash map, and the first value will be the key or the row, whatever you want to call that. It should be properly called the key, but it doesn't really matter what you call that. So we will check the key of the record, which is value 1, and we are expecting that value 1 to be A. So the value is letter character A. Now if it doesn't match that condition, it won't be returned for us. So to finish that, we just do run and con here, and we close that up like that. Now do note that this hash map will only work if you are looking for the equal value. If you are going to work with more or less, we will get into that later, but it is a lot more complex expression there. However, for now we can simply save that, or you don't really have to save that, and we will simply launch this and see how it works. So we have a value 1, and the value will be A. Let's see if all the values that are displayed will be like that. We are waiting here, and we get some values, a lot of values, a lot of records. And so the first record is value 1A, the second value 1A, third is the same, and as you can see, all of them has value 1A. And that concludes our lecture for the day. Hello! In this lecture, you will learn how to use two types of filters. So this one will be a bit more sophisticated filter because we will be using something called lambda expression instead of our hash map technique. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with lambda expression, you don't really need to understand, or I will explain the basics that you need to know, but you don't need to get into the specifics. However, if you do want to understand that, you can read a quick article on that. This is a C# thing, this is also a thing for other languages, and it's useful to know. So, in the actual code here, we already have prepared two methods with connections open here. So we have opening in the filter_less method. So we will be filtering the lesser values than the one we will input. And here we have filter_more. So this one will be greater values than the one that we will be inputting. And in the actual console, in the main method, we already have the dynamic output set up. So we have filter_less here. We will output that. And then we will right line this separator line. And then we will read key so that we can take a look at the first output. And then we will press any key and you will see the second output from the filter_more method. So, to start, we simply write a return because we will be returning. We don't need to take a look of anything in here. And we just write R as usual. And then we access the DB database. And as usual, it's test. And here the table will be called numbers table. So we write numbers table because we have several fields that contain numbers for the filtering purposes. And now the interesting part begins, and that is the filter. So first of all, you write the same filter as you would do anywhere else. You write filter, but now the interesting part begins. You need to declare a lambda expression. So first of all, we declare a variable for the lambda expression. Let's call it a variable here. And we write equals and this more or less sign like that. You will see the bigger sign in the video. So now we write doc again, and as you can see, it contains all of these methods here. Now, the way that happens when you write a lambda expression and you create that variable, it will be able to access everything from the previous methods here. Again, it's quite difficult to understand if you're not familiar with it, but you don't really need to understand that to use this. Just remember these two signs here, the lambda expression sign, and you have variable, and after that you have the actual filtering system. So you have doc, stands for document of course, and then we will do get field. So we are getting the field in the record, and the field will be A. There are 3 fields in this record, but we will be using field A. And here we will have, after that, we will get these GE. So GE is, as you can see, it says what it does, compare values, testing if the left-hand value is greater than or equal to the right-hand value. So this one should be less, so this doesn't suit us, but in the next method we will be using GE. So now let's find the less, so we have LE, and we can read that again, testing if the left-hand value is less than or equal to the right hand, and this one suits our needs. So let's click on that, and here we simply insert the value, and the value is of course a number, and that will be, oh, this time let's do 10. And that's it, you have your filter. Now you just need to have your output, and you do run, simple run as usual, and connection inserted in the run. And now we can save that. So after that's done, we can now simply copy this whole return like that, and we will copy it and we will paste it in the filter_more method. We can paste it here, and now we are looking for greater. So we simply change the LE like that. We do GE now. And again, we can read that, testing if the left hand value is greater than or equal to the right hand. So that works for me. And we can click on that and we get greater than 10. So the fields will be greater than 10. And again, I always encourage copying. You just need to know which parts of your copy have to be checked thoroughly. And after all that's done, we can simply launch this program. We'll see how that goes. So again, we will get two outputs. With first one, the A field will be less than 10. And as you can see, we got that. So we can see A2, A3, A8, A2 again, A3, and then again A8, A3, and it's all less than 10. And so now we get to the second output, and we click enter or any other key on your keyboard, and you can see now we get A12, A78, and then here again 78, 12, and basically everything is more than 10. So that works perfectly, and that concludes our lecture for the day. Hello. In this lecture, you will learn how to pluck the values from the result after you have filtered something. Or if you retrieve all the values from the table, it works the same way. But basically what plucking is, you just select or you retrieve only the fields that you want to retrieve, only the fields that you have specified. So in the code here, we have a simple output to the console. So what we are doing here, we will do that filter, and the filter will filter out some values, and we will receive all those values and put them out on the console. Now, the thing about this table, we are using the table test filter, and all of the records have 3 fields plus the ID field, so total of 4 fields, but we will only be getting 2 of those fields. So the first one will be value 1 and the second will be value 2. Now we'll get into the code and you'll see how simple that is to do. So we do the return right away. We won't be breaking here, so there's no point in doing something else. And we do that, and now we of course go to R, and then we have to go to the database, and then the database is as usual test, and then we have the table, and table this time is test filter, like that. And now we have filter, and this time we are using R hash map, so we write R hash map, and so we will delete all the values that have field value 1, and that field has to have value A. So let's do that. So we write the name of the field first. As you can see in the description, it's key, and the second one will be value. So it's the field is value 1, and the actual value, it's A. So now we have our filter done, and what we will do now is very interesting. We will pluck out those values. So you write pluck like that, and now you need some kind of a sequence. So we simply write the field names. You could actually use that object for this, but we will just do the field names. So we do value 1, and we also want value 2, and we will leave out the ID value, the ID field, and also value 3. And now we simply run like that, and we enter the connection. So we do that, and we save. And now we will launch our program. So we will see how many we get and what we get. As you can see, it's quite straightforward. This is a very useful thing to have because you rarely need the whole record. And we got those values. So we have a total of probably 7 records here. And we get, in the first one, we get field value 1, which is A, the value. And then we have field value 2, which is B, the value. It doesn't matter what the value 2 field is. We just care about filtering the A, and as you can see, we all have the A's in the first one. And as you can also see, we have only 2 fields. And that concludes our lecture for the day. Hello! In this lecture, you will learn how to update the record, the fields of record, specific fields of record, or all of the fields of record by filtering that record, or rather finding that record by its ID. So, what we have here, we have our get method, which will simply get the record by its ID. And then we also have our insert method here. As you can see, it will be using a custom object, and to make this interesting, we will actually create that object outside of this whole file. So to do that, we will need to create a new class. So to do a new class, you need to right-click on the project, and then you go to add. And you could go to the new item, but the quicker way is to simply go to the bottom of this thing and click on class. After you click on that, you get this add new item displayed, but the class element is already selected. So all you need to do is actually name that, and our name for the class will be custom object, just like that, and we click add. And in our custom object, we will need 2 values, only 2. As you can see, we have our insert method right here. So we have test value 1 and test value 2. We will be inserting only 2 values, only 2 fields. As you can see, we will be using the test table. So let's copy that name. And what you need to do here, you need to do public. It's important to do public because you won't be able to access that any other way. So you do public, and then actually you first do public string, and then you do the name, and then you simply do get set. And then we can simply copy that because the second one is test value 2, so we just change the number like that, and we save that. And as you can see, now the custom object is being constructed. It works perfectly, and we already added that value. So we have test val 1, test val. So we have both of them the same. And here in our main, we will have the insert. So the insert, as you can see, it returns a string. The generated keys, 0 index, and that will be our ID for the record, which we will be using for the update. And then we print that its ID, and then we print the actual ID on the next line. And then we have updated. So in the next line, we call updated A. And if we go to that, we can see that update actually returns the get method, and get method returns the record by its ID. So we will want to see what it looks like when it's actually updated. So now we need another object for the update, or we could use the same one. So we can copy this time the same one, but I will explain why you shouldn't do that. Or if you need that, you could, but basically if you use the same object for insertion as you use for the update, you're basically updating all of the fields in the record except for the ID field, because if you want to update one specific field or two specific fields or any number of these specific fields but not all of them, you need to create another object. Because even if you send an empty string, even if you send a null value, that record, that field of the record will be updated. So essentially, you will be deleting that field, the value for that field. So what we have here, we will be updating both of them, so we don't need to create another object. You will learn how to do that in the next lecture of the filtered update. But for now, on this one, we will simply do here test val1 and test val1 here. So we will change that, or we could add some more characters. It doesn't really matter for the purpose of this demonstration here. Now we create a variable result. You can do variable, or we don't actually have to do anything here because we won't be returning, so we can leave that at that, and we can simply copy one of these. And as you can see, there is a bit of a problem here. We have our table, but we don't have the actual database. Now if you only have one database on your server, it will be fine. But if you do have more than one, it could lead to some strange conflicts. So let's do the database on both. So let's do db like that. Right, and the database is our test database. And we can copy this from here. We take one dot with us, and we will put that right here, and we have declared both of them. And now we will copy the database and the table, and we could actually copy the ID as well because we will need that. So we simply put it right here, and we just write update. So it's the actual update. We got that now, and we insert the obj here, and the update is done. We just need to run that. So let's do run and con like that. Very simple. As you can see, it's quite straightforward. And now we save that, and we will launch our application. It's not difficult to do here, and it's a very useful feature. And as you can see, we got our ID, and we see here that this record, so ID, the same ID that we inserted, but the test value 1 field is now test val1. And if you remember, we inserted test val, and in the second one it was also test val, but now we have test val 1, 1, 2, 3. And that concludes our lecture for the day. Hello! In this lecture, you will learn how to update the record, the fields in the record, by actually filtering the record. So you can use the r-hash map, or you could use the lambda expression filters, whichever you prefer, or rather whichever you need. So first of all, in the code, we are already seeing that we have the update calling here, and we have our output. So we are outputting the whole table, every record from that table we will have, and that's the method for that. It's the same method as we have usually. And then one other thing we have is we have our variable obj here. It's already constructed like that, and that object, our custom object as usual we call that, it will contain one string, value3. Now value3 will be one of the fields, so we are using the test filter table, and test filter, if you remember, it contains in the record 4 fields, so that's ID, and then you have value 1, value 2, and value 3. So the thing to note here, and the thing you have to remember, is that in the object that you are sending for the update, you only have to put the fields that you want to update. It doesn't matter if you don't put any values in those fields. However, if they are in the object, they will be changed. So essentially, if you have an empty string, a null value, you will be deleting the value for that specific field. So here we only have value 3, and therefore we will only update the value 3 field. So to do that, it's a very simple process. We just need to declare a dynamic. Actually, we do dynamic ret, let's do, and then we simply have our DB and table, so we can copy that from the get table. It's the same thing. And now we will have a filter. So let's do the filter like that, and it will be a simple r hash map filter, and we will filter the fields. So we do field value 1, and we will look for records that where value 1 contains a letter A. And now we can do the update. So we do update, and we insert the obj object here. And now we do run, and it will run all that. So as you can see, it's quite simple. We just need the connection here, and what we need as well is we need to set that string in the object. So it's value 3, and we will put in the W like that. Let's close that, and now we can start the application. We will see how it works. It's very simple. Now you can do this with r hash map, you can do it with other filters, with lambda expression filter. It doesn't matter, we will all work. Now as you can see in the output, we have in this record we have value 1, and that's A, and then value 3 got updated to W. And then this one record, again, it has value 1, which is A, and value 3, which is W. And that concludes our lecture for the day. Hello! In this lecture, you will learn how to remove a record from the database table. So as you can see here, we have our first method, insert, which will insert our record, and it will also give us the key for the record, because this time we are learning how to remove a record by filtering it by its ID. We will later learn how to do the same by filtering using other filters. So first of all, in the main here, we will have our insert, and then we will get that ID, and then we will write line to see what kind of ID that was, and then we will have a table, getTable method here. Now what that does, it will simply show us all of the records in the table so that we can see the records prior to the removal, and afterwards we will delete. So we have our delete method. We don't have anything working here yet, but we do have a breakpoint, and we will stop after the deleting to see what kind of values we get. These values won't exactly be useful when you're deleting by ID. However, when you do a filter delete removal, it will be quite useful, because you will be able to see how many values, how many records were deleted. So in the end, we will get table again, and we will see all the records except the deleted one. So now we can go to the delete method, and we will create a variable here. So we do variable result, we call that result, and then once again, as usual, we do r, then db, and this one as usual will be test. We could have copied that from here, but let's do it like that this time. So then we have table, and table, as you can see in the insert one, we have test table. So you write test table here, and now the interesting part begins. So first of all, you need to find that record. Since you're looking for it by ID, as usual, as you would get a record normally, you write get, and you click enter on that, and you of course pass on the ID. So you have the ID here, and now it's very simple. is simply delete. So delete method here. And there you have it. The record will be deleted. We just need to run that. So we do run as usual and con the connection here. And we close that. So now we can launch our program. And as you can see here, we also have console read key right here. So what that will do, it will stop. As you can see, we got our ID on top here, and we got our first batch of records, but we need to click a button, any key rather, on your keyboard to get the rest of the results. So we click enter, let's say, and we break now. We break on the delete, and if you hover on the result, the variable that you get, you can see that you have deleted, and that is the one. So it says that it has deleted one record. And if you have some kind of other filter, which we will see in the next lecture, you might see higher values here. So it could be 10, it could be 100, it could be 1000. And as you can see, you also have errors, inserted, replaced, and these don't really matter except for the errors one. Now we can click continue, and we get another batch of results. So now you could look for that record here. As you can see, we have first batch here and the second one, and if you would look through the second one, you would not find that record that we have inserted and then deleted. And that concludes our lecture for the day. Hello! In this lecture, you will learn how to delete, remove a record that has been filtered. So the filter we will be using is equals filter. So we are basically testing if the record matches, the field of record matches the value that you have provided. So in the code here, we already have our insert method, which will insert one value. This one inserts one value. And in our main method, we have a loop. It loops 7 times. And as you can see, it will display each ID, and it will create, actually it's 8. So it will create 8 elements, 8 records. And then afterwards, we will kind of separate that on console, and we will get our table values. We will see all of the values that we have in the table. So as usual, it will be this simple getTable function, getTable method, and we get all of the values from the table. So after that, we display that, and we have console read key so that we don't get another batch right away. So after we click that key, we will do our delete method, and afterwards we will get again all of the values from the table, but you will not find the filtered ones because we will of course be removed, deleted, whichever word you prefer. So now let's get to the interesting part, and that is the delete method. And what we need to do here, as you can see, it's void. We won't be returning anything, but we will create that variable anyways here. So we do variable result, we will call that, and as usual we will access the database and the table. So to make that quicker, we can simply copy part of it from here. And now we get to the interesting part. So the interesting part is of course the filter. Now we will be using the filter with the lambda expression, but we will do equals value, not more or less, as we have learned before. We haven't actually seen this filter yet, so it will be interesting to look at that. So we do doc, and then we do that lambda expression. Again, if you don't know what that is, I suggest you do a quick read, but basically you write some kind of a variable here, and then you put these two signs here, which are lambda expression, as it says right here. And then once you write that variable doc again, you'll basically get anything that the previous item has access to. So now we do doc and we get field, of course. This field will be test value 1. So we get that field, and then we do equals eq. So what this does, it, as you can see here, it's written down, test if 2 or more values are equal. Now, or more part, it's quite interesting. You can actually have an array here of objects to check, and this one isn't exactly useful with text, because we can use the R hash map thing that we learned before, but you could use that with text, but it is especially useful with numbers. But we do simply equals, and this one will be text, so the value that we are inserting, test value 1, is test val 12 or 1, 2. So we can just copy that and enter that here. So basically, we'll create those 8 values, 8 records, and afterwards we will delete them. So what we do now is very simple. We simply write delete, as we did in the delete by ID lecture. So we have that delete like that, and we simply write run, and we enter the connection. And we close that up. Now we will add a breakpoint here so that we can see what is that result. And now we can save that, or you don't have to save that, and let's launch this program. So we'll first do the insertion. We will see what values we have in the table. And you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, I believe it was. And we got, so let's first of all go to the top. We got the IDs here. We don't actually need those IDs, but it's interesting to see how many are displayed. And then we have the actual values in the table for the database. So we have, as you can see, test val 12, and then again test val 12, and we have many of them right here. So test value 1, the key or the field, and value is test val 12. Now once we click the button, any key on the keyboard, we will delete test value 1, test val 12, and we won't see them again. So let's click that key, and we are breaking now. So the delete has happened, and as you can see here, you have this root, and you basically get deleted 7. So actually we inserted 7, and we will delete, we have deleted 7 records. And now if we click continue, we will get the output, and we can go to the top, and as you can see, that's been separated. So in the first output we got test value 1, test val 12, and we got several of them. But if we go through the second output, we can see that there's no such test value 1 field. So if we slowly go through that, we won't see any of them. And it's done here, so we didn't find any of them, and our deletion was successful. And that concludes our lecture for the day. Hello! In this lecture, you will learn how to limit the results that you get from your query. So, as you can see here, we already have our output to the console set up, and we have our method, which will simply access the table, and now it would get all of the results, all of the records that we have in the table. So what we will try to do is we will try to prevent that from happening, and we will try to get only 3, 5, or whatever amount you want of records. So first of all, let's see what we get if we call that function like that. Now we will wait for that to load. The actual syntax here is very self-explanatory and it's very simple. So let's see what we get. Okay, and we get a lot of records. Probably have 5, probably 8 or 9 records. So we will try to limit that to just 2 records, or let's do 3 this time. So what you do after your query, so this time after table, you click that dot and you write limit, and as you can see here, you just enter a simple number. So this time we'll enter 3. It has to be an integer, of course, and we have limit 3. Now here we have a table, so we get all records from the table, but you could use filters, and then after the filter you would do the same thing. So let's launch that and see what happens. As you can see, it's quite straightforward here. And we get only 3 results, 3 records. And that concludes our lecture. Hello. In this lecture, we will learn how to find the minimum and maximum values from the table and from a certain key for the record. So first of all, we see that we already have the console output handled. So we have 2 methods. The first one is max, and it will return a dynamic. So this one will be a raw JSON string here. We will display that. So it will actually only be one of these fields, one of these key value pairs from the whole set of the record. So we have max, min, they both have the connections opened, and now we can start with the max. So we do a simple return right away, and then we of course go to R, and we go to DB. DB once again is test, and then we go to the table, and table this time we will use the numbers table because we are looking for minimum and maximum values. So now we will pluck one of the fields out, so we write pluck, and since we only need one of the fields, we will write that into a string, so we write A. We will need the field A. Now in the numbers table, it's actually numbers table, not numbers, but in the numbers table you have A, B and C fields which all contain some integer value. Now, to find the maximum one, you simply write max, click enter on that, and you close that up. You don't need to insert anything there. And now you just do to JSON. As you can see, this is very straightforward, and now you do run, and of course the connection here. So again, you access the table, and then you go to pluck out that field, and then you simply look for the maximum value in that. So as it says, finds the maximum element of a sequence. Now we can copy that, simply copy that. Again, copying is great, and we paste that right here. And now this one is minimum, so as you can probably guess, we will change the max to min, which stands of course for minimum. And we close that up just like that. It's the same field A, and we save that, and we have all that, and the console is already handled. So now we just launch the program, and we will get those raw JSON strings for the both outputs. So that's the first one. So the maximum is 78, and the minimum is 0. And that concludes our lecture for the day. Hello. In this lecture, we will look at a real-world example. We will write some code here, we will follow along, and we will see some best or at least better practices of using the Rethink database in the C# application. Now, in the actual code here, we are in the main program.cs, and we already have something in our main file, in our main method. So we can see here that we have a loop, we have a boolean called shutdown. So basically, as far as the console interface goes, this has already taken care of it. We will just be writing the actual methods that insert or retrieve data from the database. So first of all, we have here enter key for a feature. So the console will be reading a key, and as you can see here, the I letter key on your keyboard will go to the insert, and then it will ask how many records you want to insert and which formula. So basically what we are going to do, we are going to have 3 formulas, and then we are going to generate some random variables for those formulas, and the application will simply do a calculation, and it will insert the data for the calculation, and it will also insert some statistical data. So that will mostly be the time it takes for the calculation to be completed. And that's very interesting here. It's not difficult to do, but it is quite complex enough to test this whole database thing. And then later we have our key R, which stands for retrieve here, as you can see in the comment. And we have all these different retrievals. So we will first build the first 2. So we will retrieve the whole statistics table, and the whole calculations table. We won't be filtering anything yet, we will just retrieve those tables as we have learned in one of the first lectures of this course. And then later we will get total time spent on calculations. And then, as you can see, this is in the loop, and we have an exit strategy here. So once everything is finished, we have press escape to exit, and if you enter, or in fact any other key, it will continue looping all over again, and you will be able to do another command here. So we can now minimize the main because it takes up a lot of space. As you can see also, we already are calling these methods that we are going to build now. So there's nothing to be worried about. As you can see, we have those errors here, but this is just because we haven't built those methods yet. So now we can minimize that, and we will of course start with the insert method. So this one has to be static because it goes into the static main method. It's too difficult, too complex to do any other way, so we are not going to bother ourselves with that. So first of all, we will create static, and it's gonna be async. We will try to make one of these calls as asynchronous, just to see if it actually works. So we have static, async, void, insert, and then we will have integer n. This is for the amount of records you want to insert, and then you have string formula. So we will have 3 formulas, each one of them encoded into a number. So number 1 will stand for this formula, number 2 for the other formula, and so on. So we have, let's just name it formula, and then we open that up. And now what we are going to do, this is different from the previous lectures because we usually were making a couple of different database API calls, and we didn't need that. But what we will do now, we will try to actually create a global connection for the API, for the Rethink database. And so to do that, it can be quite complex, and for different applications, again, it could be stored in different ways. It could also be used in specific scenarios, in specific features only, doesn't have to be global application wide, but in this case we are just using this main program. We are running everything from here, so we will declare that connection here. And to do that, you will again first access the RethinkDB R, and this time we will need to declare static. Now you may know already that you cannot declare a variable like that, var keyword. So what you need to do static, and you need to find the actual object that the variable represents. So this one will be, this is for the driver. This is RethinkDB driver, and then RethinkDB again. And that's it. We call it R as usual. It's just global this time. So now we do equals RethinkDB driver, RethinkDB, and of course R. And now we move on to the connection. It's again static, and this one's important to remember because it's not exactly as straightforward as the driver is. The driver, you just don't have any other choices most of the time. But here you do RethinkDB again, you go to the driver again, and you go now to net, N-E-T, you click on that, and then you go to connection, and connection will be your object. So we will call that con again, just as we used to do in the other lectures, and then we need to do RethinkDB, and then we do driver, and then we need to do RethinkDB again, and now we actually need to access the R again. So we do connection here, and this is, as you can see, a very long line. So we will do a similar thing as to what we have seen in previous lectures. We will go to a new line. So just like that, we can go to, of course it wants to give that connection like that. So we don't want to do that, but we first want to have our host name, like that. Well, as you can see, we can't really go to the new line properly, so we'll just do that in one line. It will be quicker that way. So we do host name, and host name of course is localhost. And now we're gonna do the port as we did before in all of previous lectures. So we do port, and the port is 28015. Now this is the default, and probably most systems will use this port, but it could actually be a different one, so be careful for that one. And we do timeout 60 seconds as usual, and then we simply do connect, and we have our connection, our global connection this time. And we have it here, everything works perfectly. So now we are going to go back to the insert method, and we are going to insert something. So what we are inserting, we will need some random data, of course. So we do a variable, and we write R&D, stands for random of course, and we do new random. Now random is a very interesting thing that we have here. It's actually a class, and it will generate an integer from whatever number you want to whatever number you need. And so now we just go and do a simple if statement. So we do if, and we write formula. So we will check if the formula is 0 or the formula is not provided. We will simply generate a random formula so that we don't get these strange errors. So we do formula equals to 0. 0 is a string here. So now we need OR, and it should be here, so we have that. Now these characters can be quite difficult to find on your keyboard. Sometimes you can find it on a backslash key, which is near the enter key, so on your right side, but sometimes you could find it on the top left side near the digit 1. so you sometimes can get a bit of a struggle looking for it. So now we will move on to formula, and we will check if it's empty. If it's empty, again, we need some kind of a formula, because we only have 1, 2, and 3 formulas. And to generate that, again, it's a very useful feature. It's a very useful class. We do formula equals R and D. And to get that random integer, we do next. And as you can see, it returns a non-negative random integer. So it has to be non-negative. Remember that. And we do next. And as you can see, you don't have to put anything here, but we will put 1, and then we will put another number, so from 2, and this one we will have to do 3, because of course there are only 3 formulas that we are going to have, and we need to convert that to string like that, and we have our random formula. So now the interesting part begins, and we will have a very big for loop statement. So we write for, and we will put in n in the length, because we will need to loop it for however many records we need. And now we are going to the point where we need some kind of an object to insert, and we will actually need to have 2 objects, one for the statistics insertion and one for the calculations. So first of all, let's start with the calculations object, because we will need to use it first. And we simply do add, and we do class. So the class we will be naming calculations, C-A-L, C-U, and so on. Calculations, like that. And it's a class, we have it class, everything's fine. And we do add. So once we did the add, we don't actually need to make this one public. It's in the same scope here, so it's all fine. It will find that object here. So we need to make some comments, of course, because we will have the formula encoding. So we do encode formula, and we will do 1 for A times B by C. And we're just gonna name 1 for now, for 1 comment, because we aren't really looking to learn the commenting. We are looking to learn the RethinkDB. So now we do public, string, and formula, like that. We do formula, and of course, as usual, it's get and set. So we have public here, and we have all that, and we can actually copy this and paste it once, paste this Ctrl V, and it's not happening, but let's try that again, and we have it. And so we are only pasting it once, because every other one will be double. So we do double, and now we do double A, and then we do another one, and the 4th one. So the last one will be result, and the others, as you can guess, will be A, B, and C, just like that. And we have our calculations object. So now we will be creating our statistics object, which will be a very simple one, but there will be one very interesting part of that object, which will actually be interesting in the way it is inserted into the database itself. So we will look at that later. But for now, we do again add, we do class, and we will name this one simply statistics. So we do statistics like that, and we do add. Now here we again don't need to make this public, but we do here public string calculation ID, let's call that. So this one will be the record ID for the calculation. So we first insert that, and we then take the ID and put it in here in the statistics record. So we do get, set, and we are done with this first one. We have 2 more, and so we can actually copy this, it's easier. And so the second one will be double, and we'll call that time taken. So this is how much time it took to make that one calculation. And then the last one, and that's the interesting one I was talking about, it's the date time. And again, you don't see any difference here, but once it is inserted in the database, you will see an actual difference. So we call that date done, because we will get that date time UTC date time once everything is completed and once we are ready to insert the record into the database. So that's all done. Now we just need the calculations, so for the formulas, and we could actually start with the calculations with the formula. So for that we will need another class, and that one will be called, of course, formulas. So we do formulas, just like that, formulas, and we create that class. And so now here we will have 3 static methods. Basically we just take some values and give you the result of that calculation. So first of all, a quick one, public static double, of course, and we call that formula 1. So we do double A and double B and then double C, just like that, and we are done. And we need just to calculate that, and this one will be A times B and divided by C. Very simple. So this one will take barely any time at all to complete, and we can actually copy this because we will need the same variables. So the second one will be called 2 and the third one will of course be called 3. So the second one will be A divided by square root of the sum of C and B. So to do a square root, again, a great feature of C#. So we have math, as you can see, system math, and you do that, and then you have SQRT, stands for square root, of course. So we have that, and we do a little addition here. So we do C plus B. Very simple, very quick. And as you can see, there are no errors. And then the last one will be the most complex one, so that we actually have some time to look for to calculate. So we can delete all these, they are irrelevant here. And we do first of all math power, so that will be POW, so we do POW like that, and this one will be A powered by 10, and then that one by math log, so that's a logarithm with base E. Now you don't have to understand these formulas, and they actually probably mean nothing, but we're just doing that to entertain the time taken to actually make these calculations. That's why we're trying to make these formulas a bit more complex. So we do logarithm, and we do B here, and then let's do minus math SQRT, so square root, and then in that we do math power powered by, and here we do C by 3, and we close that all up. So it will be a very strange number here and everywhere else probably. So we can save that, and now we will get back to the program and we will see how to insert everything here. So in the insert method we will go to the for loop now. So here we are going to build a new object. So we do again variable obj equals new, and this one's calculations object. So first of all we do obj formula. We right away can insert the formula, so we do formula like that. Okay, and then we will have our 3 variables, so we can insert them prior to the calculations as well. So we do obj A equals R&D, of course, next, and 1 to, let's say, 100. And we can actually copy this. So we paste once, we paste twice, and we change A to B, and then another A to C this time. And we can increase these second values a bit, so we do 1000 and 1000 here. Again, it's random, so you won't probably get either 1 or 1000 at all. So we will get many random integers. Now, we need to create an object for these statistics, so we do variable obj1 equals new statistics, and we build that like that. And now this is a bit more complicated part, so we do switch, and we double tab after inserting the switch. As you can see, it builds the switch, and we need to break on default. We won't actually have any default this time. So first of all, we have case which is 1, string 1. Don't forget, it has to be a string. It can't be anything else. So here we have the switch, will of course be the formula. It will either be some random formula or the one you insert. And so you have case 1, and you need to break on each case, so that you only have one case here. And then the second one and the third one, just like that. You change those numbers. And as you can see, you have a lot of preparation for the actual insertion here, but this is quite normal, and with other databases you would probably have the same kind of preparation as well. So in the first option we need date time. Again, this will be very interesting to see as an output, that date time. So we do dt1, that's a name for the variable, and we have date time UTC now. So the reason we are doing that, we will simply subtract the dates, so the date on which we began calculation and the date on which it will end. Now again, you could build a timer, and you could use that timer class or method, whatever you're using. It should probably be class, and you could do that, but again, for simplicity purposes, we are not learning how to build timers and all that stuff. So we are just doing a simple subtraction, and for the purpose of this lecture and for the upcoming lectures, it will work perfectly. So we have now obj result t, actually it's equals, and we have formulas and formula 1. Now remember, formulas is a class that contains static methods, so we don't actually need to build anything there. We just use that method as it is. It's quite straightforward and simple. So we have obj dot a, and then obj b, and then obj c. Now we do obj1 time taken equals tm1, and we have missed something actually. So we have that obj time taken, but we don't have the subtraction done. So to do subtraction, we actually need to declare a time span. It's a very interesting concept. You get time span when you subtract dates, and when you want to subtract certain amount of time, you would use time span. So you simply do time span, and let's call that tm1, and equals date. Now this is a very interesting feature that I'm going to show you. This is how you subtract the dates. There's no other way to do that unless you separate them into strings and try to do something like that, but it's kind of pointless since you already have it built in. So you have date time, and then you get the current date, and of course we are using UTC. You should always use UTC, especially when you're working with different machines, different servers and all that kind of stuff. So you do UTC now, and then you go to subtract. So as you can see, it's written subtracts the specified date and time from this instance. So again, this date and time could have already been established, so it could have been some previous date from the database, and you're doing that, so subtracting from that. So it could be many various use cases for that. But we're doing subtract dt1. And now we close that up, and here we will get the time taken. So we do tm, and this one we would like total milliseconds. Now it is very important, it's crucial that you use total. It has to be total, because let's see if we have that. We have here milliseconds. It won't give you what you need, it will just give you of that specific interval. So you want total milliseconds. So it converts all the days, months, years, whatever you want, whatever you have. So we do milliseconds, and that's it. And then we go to obj1 like that, and we do date done equals date time UTC now, of course. So that's very simple. And we want to actually display that on the console, that we have done it. So we do console write line like that, and we do obj1 time taken like that, because we already got total milliseconds to that, so there's no point going back to tm1 again. So we have that done, and again we have several other options. But for that, we can simply do a sort of a copy-paste approach. Now, I always encourage people to copy the code. It is a lot quicker than writing it, and you will likely make less mistakes doing that. However, you do have to know what to check for. So, first of all, we can see right away that Formula 1 will not be Formula 1 in the next options. So it will be Formula 2 or 3, whatever you're doing. And then also we will have to change some of these variable names. However, you will actually see an error for that, so it doesn't really matter, you don't have to look at it yourself. So we copy that, and we do second one and the third one, and as I said before, you have the errors for these, but you don't have the errors for the Formula 1. So first of all, let's change that, Formula 2 and Formula 3. And then dt1 we can change to dt2 here as well, dt2, tm1 to 2, tm1 to 2 again. And this one will be the same, it's just to 3. Not 2, but 3 very quickly. And as you can see, it probably took us more than 5 minutes, probably about 10 minutes to write this first one, but it took us probably less than 2 minutes, or probably less than a minute, to put in the 2 more of these calculations. So that's one part of this, and we see we have a switch statement here. Now we need to actually insert stuff. So what we do here, we need to again get that ID. So we do dynamic response, we will call it this time, doesn't matter what you call it, await RDB, and it's of course test as usual. It's the same database, and we do table now, and the table will be called, it's a very complex name, it's called example calculations, like that, example calculations. And then if you remember from one of the earlier lectures, you have insert, and what do we add here? We add the object, so it's obj because this is calculation. So we can go back to the top, and we have somewhere here it's built. Okay, so it's obj, and we have formula a, b, and c variables, so that's the obj, and obj1 will be for statistics. So we do obj like that, and then we can actually do to JSON, and we'll try to attempt to run this one async. So we do run async, and we need the connection here. Now we use the global connection, and as you can see, we have no errors. It works perfectly. So now we need to get that key. So we will do that as we did in the previous lectures. So we do JSON value, JSON, let's call that, equals JSON value, and we do parse, and we pass the response, just like that. Now, one thing to note here, we have JSON value, system, JSON value. It has already been previously installed in this project and referenced on top, so it can find it, but usually it won't find it. You'll need to download that, so be wary of that. Now we do have obj1, and we have calculation ID equals JSON, and this one again, it's important to remember or to make some notes somewhere. So we need generated keys, like that. And of course we do need index because it is a list, so we do need index 0, just like that. And finally we do await. We won't need any output from this one, so we do the insertion. Now we can copy this one actually with await even, and this one will be example statistics, the table, and it's obj1. So again, you can see that I know what I'm checking for when I'm copying, and it all works out perfectly in the end. So we have again run connection async and all that stuff, and now it seems to be all very nice and perfect, and we don't need to do anything else here. Actually, we can save that, and we won't actually be running that command. There's no point, we still don't have the retrieval system. So in the next lecture we'll try to build that retrieval system. We'll try to get all the records from the calculations table and then from the statistics table. And that concludes our lecture for the day. Hello! In the previous lecture we did the setup of the connection, and then we inserted some values, made some calculations, and then created some statistics. And now in this lecture we will try to actually retrieve those values. So we will retrieve the database records, the full records, and all of the records that we have. So as you can see in the main, we have on the key R, we would go into the choice and we will write line 1 for statistics and 2 for calculations, and then later we will see how to do these minimum and then maximum and all that other stuff. So first of all, we'll just retrieve all the values from the statistics table and from the calculations table, and that will be enough for this lecture. So first we go to the get all statistics. We don't have that method created yet, but it will be once again a simple static method. We won't be doing a synchronous one this time. So we do static and then of course dynamic here, and then we call this one get all statistics because we are getting them all here. So this one's very simple. We just do return, and then we of course access the R and then the DB, and the DB is of course as usual called test, and then we go to the table and we are retrieving the statistics, so that will be the example statistics table. Do example statistics, just like that, and then we do run. As you can see, this is very simple. We just need to insert the connection, and if you remember, the connection is global one, so we don't need to declare a new one here, and we can actually simply copy this method like that, and we paste it, and now we get all calculations. So we just call it that, get all calculations, like that. And now this one is example as well, but calculations. And we have everything else. So you see, again, copying is a great thing. You don't need to write anything, just change a few things, and you'll save hours and even days of time when building huge or even medium-sized applications. So we have all that, we can save it, and now we can go back to the console. And as you can see, we already have those declared. So if you enter 1, you'll get all these statistics, and if you enter 2, you'll get all of the calculations. Now also, once one of the commands has been completed, you will be able to run another one or escape the loop and therefore the application. So let's do example, let's launch it. It will take some time to launch here, but as you can see, everything is quite straightforward. We did the insertion in the previous lecture, and now we are doing a very quick retrieval. So it is asking for a key for a feature. So we have the key R, which stands for retrieve. So let's go back to the console and do R. You just click that, and that's it. And as you can see, it also gets printed, which is quite unwanted, but we won't go into that because it's not, the lecture is not about that. So we have 1 for statistics, and let's try the statistics. So we enter 1, and then we enter the enter key because it's not reading for a key, it's reading for the input. So let's click enter, and let's see what we get. And as you can see, we are getting all the calculations, and if you remember all the other outputs, you probably have noticed something unusual in this one. So you get all these nice outputs, you get the time taken to calculate. This is in milliseconds, so as you can see, it takes barely any time to calculate. And we can go through all of these, but the thing you notice is the date done. And as you can see, it's a RE or REQL type. So the type is time, and if you remember, this was the date time in the C#. So date time in C# will translate automatically into time type in the Rethink database. So we will later look into how this is actually retrieved, how can you get a real date from this epoch time. It's actually quite simple. You just calculate, you just pass that kinda, and you get that. And you also see that the time zone is 0000 plus 0, and it's all 0, which means it's UTC. So that's very straightforward, and it's actually very useful to use this because you don't need to have a string which contains some strange type, some strange arrangement of perhaps time zones, time zone notation and all that stuff. You just have one simple number, and then you have the time zone and of course the name of the type. And with that we will conclude our lecture for the day.